This special Jewish History podcast is dedicated in loving memory and leilui nishmas Michael, Ben Shmuel and Yehudit, whose Yartzeit falls out on the 6th day of Adar, which is the day that this Jewish History podcast is being recorded. May his soul be elevated in heaven. Perhaps the starkest difference between our giants, our heroes, our great leaders, and those of the nations is that with our sages, the more you know, the closer you get to them, the more refined you discover that they are. The more their nobility of character shines forth. Whereas we're told not to meet your heroes, the opposite is true amongst the nations. We've been graced with so many sages, people of true piety, with towering intellect, paired with saint-like humility and empathy and selflessness. My grandfather, blessed memory, used to say that he dreams one day to write comparative biographies, to take 10 great sages that we've had and compare it to 10 great heroes amongst the nations, and to compare the two and to demonstrate up close the true saintly piety of our sages, the selflessness and the righteousness, and compare that to the greed and warped character of the people lionized by the nations. Our nation has always had and always will have great people, princes, princesses, giants, great people. We have an embarrassment of riches. So many exceptional, outstanding sages and scholars and leaders and people that could serve as fantastic role models. And where does it all come from? It comes from the Torah. We have the Almighty's Torah. And this is the recipe to turn a human into an angel. And my grandfather, blessed memory, used to say that there's no greater proof to the veracity, to the divinity of the Torah than look at the results. The proof is in the pudding. When you see how Torah transforms a person, elevates a person, makes them more refined, makes them more spiritual, you know for sure that the Torah is not man-made. Our sages tell us, whoever studies the Torah lishma for its intended purpose, they merit lots of things, and they become beloved in the eyes of God and beloved in the eyes of mankind. And everyone looks up to them and admires them, and they get clothed in humility, and they become righteous and pious and straight and trustworthy and upright. And it lists a whole long list of transformations that happen to someone who absorbs the power of Torah. And when a person has the great privilege to meet a true Torah scholar up close and to see how Torah perfects a person, and you see a person with absolutely flawless character. I always wondered, does this even exist in the outside world? I don't know, Gandhi or Mother Teresa or the Dalai Lama, did they actually have flawless character? I don't know. But I can testify that I personally know dozens of people that don't have any discernible flaw. These are not people that write news articles about, or hymns, or movies, or people who win Nobel Prizes, people you'll pass in the street and you won't even notice that they're special in any way, but they are adorned with every conceivable positive trait, totally free of any bad trait, angels walking amongst us. And where does that come from? It comes from the Torah. This is the Almighty's prescription to achieve perfection. And if you see that and you appreciate that, you know for sure that this is not man-made. And I think a shining example of this, an outstanding example of this, is the story of the Chofetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisrael, Meir Hakohen Kagan. He was the preeminent Jewish leader in the late 19th and early 20th century. He was a man of legendary character and saintly piety, saintly humility and holiness and righteousness. There are literally thousands of documented stories that talk about his scrupulous honesty and integrity and his gentle nature and his kindness and his dedication for others and his empathy for others. I was thinking, if we're going to do a Jewish history podcast on the Chofetz Chaim, should it be 2 episodes, 3 episodes, 4 episodes? It could be 10 because there's so much. And I, like many other Jewish children. I was raised on the stories of the Chofetz Chaim. And I have the privilege that my son, Yisrael Meir, is partially named after this great sage. We're not going to do 4 or 5 or 10 episodes. We'll do one, but we'll try to capture the flavor of this absolutely resplendent character and talk a little bit about the influence that he had on the Jewish world in his day and even until today. He was, of course, a person of unparalleled personal righteousness and piety, but his contribution to the nation and to the world extends way beyond that. He wrote many, many books, and many of them in very different, disparate fields, and books that are absolutely revolutionary and shape modern Jewish life. So, for example, he's known as the Chofetz Chaim. Why? Because that's the name of his first book, Chofetz Chaim, which means desirous of life, based upon the verse in Psalms. Who is the man who's desirous of life? He who doesn't speak evil, who guards his tongue. Today, there's public awareness of the concept of Lashon Hara, of evil talk, of slander. And people learn about the laws of Lashon Hara and the severity and the importance of not saying anything bad or harmful about another person. This is attributable to him because he raised the public awareness thanks to this book. We have another set of books, the Mishnah Berurah. These are the authoritative works that clarify and explain and render rulings on all matters of practical halacha. And his standing is interesting because he didn't really hold an official rabbinic position. And nevertheless, his rulings are considered to be absolutely authoritative by the entirety of the nation. He was someone who was accepted by all, who was beloved by all, who was revered by all. Every group in the entire panoply of Jewish life looks up to him, reveres him, accepts his rulings. It's hard to imagine a Jew more beloved than the Chofetz Chaim, or a person whose influence is as impactful. So let's tell his story. The Chofetz Chaim was born in 1839. His father was a student of the great yeshiva in Volozhin. His father was a pious man, a learned man, but a shopkeeper. And his mother was actually his father's second wife. His father's first wife had passed away young, and his father actually married his sister-in-law. You can't marry 2 sisters in their lifetime. It's against the Torah law. But after the passing of one, should that happen tragically, you can marry their sister. He married the sister of his first wife, and that produced the Chofetz Chaim. And his mother was very righteous. And she was always crying and praying for her son that he should grow up to be righteous. Now, when he was 10, his father passed away at the age of 46. And his mother remarried someone whose name was Shimon from the town of Radin, which is going to be the home of the Chofetz Chaim eventually. Even though they lived a little bit in Vilna, they moved back to Radin. Now, young Yisrael Meir was a brilliant, prodigious, precocious child, and he committed himself to study with unusual intensity and diligence, but there was something really special about him, as we shall see. He got married at the ripe age of 16, which wasn't as unusual at the time as it is today. And who did he marry? So recall his father passed away, and his mother remarried someone named Shimon, and he came with a family of his own, and he was very desirous that his daughter, the stepsister of Chofetz Chaim, would marry this crown jewel of the Jewish people. And you think about what's happening over here. We have a young man who's perhaps the most desirable, eligible bachelor in all of Lithuania. He's a scholar destined to become one of the giants of the Jewish people. And every rich man in all of Lithuania would give a handsome dowry to have him as a son-in-law. But his stepfather wants him as a son-in-law. So he suggests maybe we can marry our children off. Now, the Chofetz Chaim's mother didn't like that. And there was this conflict that ensued. And when young Yisrael Meir discovered that this is causing problems to his mother's marriage, he says, I'll marry her, no problem. Now, the girl was older than him, and the family had little money or prestige, and there wasn't a family that wouldn't give up everything to have him as a son-in-law. But he said, this is going to cause problems. I'll marry her. I don't want to jeopardize my mother's marriage. Now, this sounds wonderful, but his brother, he heard about it. And he said, what's happening? They're taking my brother. So he raced back to torpedo the engagement. But as fate would have it, his brother is coming to stop this. This is a terrible thing. What's happening over here? His coach broke down before he arrived in Radin. And by the time he got there, the engagement was sealed. No problem. You could annul the engagement. Chofetz Chaim says, annul the engagement? How can I shame a young Jewish girl? I can't do that. As we'll see later on, he said about himself, I never caused pain to a single person ever in my life. He had such gentleness of character. He's engaged. He's going to marry her. And indeed, they lived together for 45 years. Now, even though his father-in-law and his stepfather was not a wealthy man, he still promised a modest dowry of 300 rubles. So at least the young scholar can concentrate on his studies. But unfortunately, his father-in-law / stepfather's business failed, and he wasn't able to fulfill his pledge. So what now? How will this young family support itself? So we have a great scholar, even as a very young man. It's quite natural. Let him go into the rabbinate. But he adamantly refused. He was eminently qualified, and many towns would clamor to have him as their rabbi, but he refused. And his mother tried to convince him, and his father-in-law / stepfather tried to convince him, and his wife. But his aversion to the rabbinate was ironclad. And I was trying to figure out why. It's natural. You have a great sage. Be the rabbi of the town. It's a good, decent living. So everyone's trying to figure this out, and some have suggested that he shunned all forms of honor. Others suggested that maybe he wanted to maintain this posture of being like a simple Jew. He always resisted any trappings of any pretensions of being anything other than a simple Jew. Maybe in his humility he felt unqualified. And some have speculated a town rabbi has to get involved in all sorts of squabbles and conflicts in the community, and that would force him to hear Lashon Hara, to hear evil talk and slander. And he made it his mission to never, ever, ever do that. And we'll see more about that in just a little bit. Regardless, he didn't take the job. And even when he opened the yeshiva, he was like the unofficial head of the yeshiva. And there was a very brief stint where he was the rabbi in his hometown of Radin, but for the duration of his life, and he lived a very long life, he had no official rabbinic position. And maybe it's always like the case like that. When someone's not tethered to a specific post or a specific community or local responsibility or faction, the impact that they can have on the nation is actually greater. So if he's not going to be a rabbi and he won't be supported by his father-in-law, what to do? He refused any handouts. He didn't want to benefit from a penny, from a kopek that he did not earn. So he served as a tutor, and his wife opened up a dry goods store. So he would study all day, and he would come help his wife in the store on market days. And he was also the bookkeeper. There's lots and lots of stories about what happened in this little shop. So one thing he always made sure to do, to make sure that the weights and measures were 100% accurate. Because if you chip off, you sell 100 pounds or 10 pounds of a good, it better be 10 pounds or else you're stealing. So he was very, very fastidious about that. And he was known and renowned for his scrupulous integrity. So everyone wanted to come to his shop. And he said, it's not fair. There's other shops here. We're taking away business from other shops. So he told his wife, we're going to close early. We'll close and let everyone else have the business. But everyone still came early. He said, we're closing the front door. Business has to come in from the back. And then when customers would come to his store, he would say, there's another store and their merchandise is of better quality. And it's better to go shop there, to try to encourage people to go to his competitors. And his customers were Jews and non-Jews alike. And one story tells that on one market day, there was a non-Jewish customer who bought a piece of fish, but left it there in the store. And he didn't know which non-Jewish client bought the fish and didn't take it. He tried to ascertain who it was. He couldn't find out who he was. So when there was another market day, every single non-Jewish client that came in, he said, well, maybe this is the guy, gave him another fish. And again, the stories of his integrity are angelic. We can't imagine, like, this is a human like us? Can't be. There's lots of stories about him where he would travel. Because when he wrote his books, he made his living off selling his books. So he's always traveling on trains and on wagons and all sorts of fantastic stories that come from those travels. And he was always dressed like a simple Jew. And it wasn't like he was, on the internet where everyone knew what he looked like. Even today, like, he didn't have his picture taken. So the famous picture of the Chofetz Chaim is actually the town butcher, allegedly. So once he's riding on a wagon, and the driver started playing games with him. They stepped out of the wagon to go for a little rest. So the driver just drove off and left him there, and he had to walk to the next town. But he got to the next town, he's asking everyone who's the driver, not to berate him, but to pay him, because you got me halfway there. I have to pay you. For many years, he would travel from town to town selling his books. And he never sold a single book until he inspected every single page to make sure that there was nothing wrong. There was no misprints, no folded pages, no miscut pages. His daughter remembers, she would tell over, I remember, there were stacks and stacks of books, and he would sometimes employ her. You cannot sell a product that's not perfect. And when he had the yeshiva, he would give a short speech to students after the prayer service, after Shachris. And one day he told his students, I can't give you any words of encouragement today. I didn't study sufficiently yesterday. Why not? Because he got a new shipment of books, and he went through book by book, page by page, to make sure that every single one of them that he's going to sell is absolutely perfect. Otherwise, it's stealing. And he said, I didn't study sufficiently yesterday. How could I speak to you? How could I tell you what you should do? How could I rebuke you or give you mus or give you direction or encouragement? I'm not worthy of it. Even when he was traveling from place to place, he wasn't a great salesman. He wouldn't walk in and say, I'm the Chofetz Chaim that the whole world knows. He would say, I'm the agent. I'm the agent of the Chofetz Chaim, because he didn't want the honor. And when people realized this is the Chofetz Chaim, wow, the great sage, the renowned the world over, they try to give him extra money because he was very, very poor. And he absolutely categorically refused to take even a penny more. And there was once that he was leaving a town, he was on the train, and someone came to him from the window and says, I want to buy the book that you're selling. So he said, okay, he gave him a book through the window, and he paid him. But it was supposed to be a 1 ruble. But the guy slipped 100 ruble note to the rabbi. Okay, I'm helping the great rabbi, giving him some extra money. So the Chofetz Chaim arrives at the next town, and he realizes what's happened. He doesn't remember who it was who gave him that. So he turns around, goes back to the town, and goes to the shul, and he starts crying, bawling, begging, who's the person who paid me extra? Come forth. I don't want to be overpaid even 1 penny. And eventually the person stepped forward, and he made sure that his integrity was untouched. And in general, so many stories about him crying. His heart was the heart of an angel. And he was very self-critical, not critical of others, critical. People used to hear him because he was always traveling to different places, and he was in inns, and people would walk by his room and they would hear him for hours, rebuking himself, castigating himself, berating himself, speaking to himself. How could he do that? How could he do that? Always trying to improve. And once they heard him crying like unimaginable tears. Why? Because he made a cheshbon nefesh. What does that mean? It means that it's a self-introspection, calculation. How am I doing? Am I righteous? Am I wicked? Am I making the right decisions with my life or not? And he went through in his head every minute of his day, every minute of his week, every minute of his year to make sure I'm using it properly. The Almighty gives you a precious minute of time. Use it properly. And there were 10 minutes that were unaccounted for. And he could not stop bawling about those 10 minutes, those 10 precious minutes that he was not able to account for. For 4 years, he served as the head of a yeshiva in a place called Vashilashuk. And again, I would tell you the stories, and you're like, oh, this sounds made up. But these stories are all true. These are verified. He lived almost 100 years. And thousands, tens of thousands of people met him, and these stories are all well documented. You can read this thick books on the Chofetz Chaim. So he would get paid by the owner of the yeshiva. He would get paid in one tranche before Pesach. It was a 50 ruble salary per year at the time. And it was Pesach 1 year, and he gets a lump sum. This is your money for the whole year. And as he's about to travel, he learns about a local bride in this town. She's a bride, but she's an orphan. And she doesn't have any money to pay for the wedding. And they were going to annul the wedding. So the great rabbi, who just received his yearly pay, finds the bride and gives her all of his money. And he had to borrow money to get home for Pesach. That's the level of righteousness and kindness and generosity and charity that we're dealing with. Once later on in his life, he was on a train and he had a significant amount of money and he was robbed. Someone robbed him. And there's a few different versions of the story. The man grabs his bag, steals all his money, and runs off the train. So the great rabbi chases him, and he's screaming at him, "It's hefker, it's hefker, it's hefker." Now, what does hefker mean? Hefker means it's a halachic state of ownerlessness. He doesn't want another Jew to be guilty of stealing. So they say, I don't own it, I don't own it, it's not mine, it's not mine. You took it from hefker, you took it from ownerless, you're not going to suffer on my behalf. There's another version of this story that a fellow passenger sees this, even if you don't know who it is, he sees a special looking Jew, and someone grabs his bag, you chase after them. And the Chofetz Chaim says, don't chase him. Who knows? Maybe he needs to marry off his daughter. Maybe this is a dowry, and I want him to have it. He spent 4 years in that yeshiva, and he returned in 1869 to Radin, to his hometown, and he founded the yeshiva, which eventually became known as Yeshivas Chofetz Chaim, named after, of course, the book and kind of the name, the eponymous name that he was known the world over with. Now, this is not really a modern yeshiva the way we think of it. It's much more informal. They would study in the local Beis Medrash, local house of scholarship, and the students would eat in local homes. So they studied in the local shul and eat in local homes, and the conditions were very austere. But eventually the yeshiva grew, and it was time to build a more proper building for this yeshiva. So what did they do? They did a fundraiser. Things haven't really changed. And they start to raise money for the yeshiva. And it's going very slowly. I wonder what that's like. Now, near this town of Radin, there was a small little village. And there was a Jew there who was fairly wealthy, a man of means, but someone who was childless. So he comes to Radin to meet the Chofetz Chaim, and he says to him, listen, I don't have any children. I have some money. I would like to build the whole building. I'm going to cover it. But I want you to name the yeshiva after after me, after my wife. So we have like a continuity, we have a legacy. So the great rabbi is very moved by this offer, but he says, I can't do it. The yeshiva, it's a public institution. If you cover all the costs, well then no one else has the opportunity to contribute. Can't be. I can't accept it all. So this man goes back to his hometown, and sometime later he finds out that the fundraiser is just not moving. They're picking up like pennies, and it's just going too slowly. So he comes back and he says, I demand to pay for the whole building. And he says, and if you're not willing to accept that, I'm going to take you to court, to a rabbinic court, to Beis Din. And they travel to Vilna, to the great Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grodzinski, and they each make their case. This man says, I would like to pay for the whole building. And yeah, if people will contribute, that's great, but it's happening too slowly. And the Chofetz Chaim says, well, it's a public institution, and I don't want to withhold the opportunity for the masses to contribute. So the great rabbi, the arbiter, he says, well, we're going to make a compromise here. We're going to take one wall of the building, and this will be yours. This will be sponsored by you and your wife, and the rest of the walls will be from everyone else. That's the resolution. Everyone's very happy, and they start heading back towards Radin, and this donor comes to the Chofetz Chaim and says, I want a blessing. So he gave him a blessing. He says, my blessing to you is, as long as I'm alive, you're alive. And the Chofetz Chaim lived deep into his 90s, which was not usual at the time, not very common. And this other person was also really old. He outlasted the Chofetz Chaim. And indeed, a few days after Chofetz Chaim passed away, he passed away in fulfillment of this blessing. So the Chofetz Chaim has a yeshiva, and he would travel to raise funds for this yeshiva. Lots of travels in his story. And even though the yeshiva had some very notable faculty members, for example, Naftali Trupp, which is a name that you might not recognize, but anyone that had the great privilege of spending time in yeshiva, no, this is one of the great giants of the Torah world before the war. The great Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz was the spiritual dean of the yeshiva. And some of the very famous students went on to found yeshivas of their own. So, for example, Rabbi David Leibowitz, who founded the Chofetz Chaim Yeshiva in the United States, and Rabbi Chatzkel Sarna, who was the head of the yeshiva in Hebron, and so on. Even though the Chofetz Chaim's yeshiva was very successful, his impact on world Jewry was largely due to his other activities, and most specifically to the revolutionary books that he wrote and the critical initiatives that he spearheaded. The first book that he published was the eponymously titled Chofetz Chaim, The Laws of Lashon Hara, of Evil Talk. The verse tells us in Psalms chapter 34, who is the man who is desirous of life? Nitzar Lashon Chameira, guard your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deceit. This is a book to live life. You desire life? Follow this prescription. Now, something very interesting about the style of writing of the Chofetz Chaim is that this was written for the layman. In almost all of his books, you could say, it's a fascinating study because he wrote so many books and so many diverse books on such different topics, and it's hard to find like a common theme. But all the things that he sensed that the nation needed, he would invest on helping them where they're at. So his books, they're not about like displaying his great genius. He was a fantastic, prodigious genius. But his books were written for the people, for even the common folk. And he wrote it, it was written in a language and in a style that was appealing to them. And many of his books, again, there's lots of them, many of the books are written in ways that really speak to you. Even today, you read the books, it's like you're so motivated to say, I take the lesson to heart and I'm going to implement it. He collects all the sources from all over the Talmud and different Talmuds and all the Midrash and all the sources and lays it out. And then he also speaks often, very often, with parables. He had a way of couching powerful teachings in a way that resonated with the common folk. And there's lots of famous parables. There's probably, you could fit a whole book with the parables of the Chofetz Chaim. A famous one about Mendel, the baker. There was this baker, and the baker would always complain that people would come to his store and look at the loaves of bread. No, this one's a little bit too moist, and this one's too overdone, and this one, and everyone's complaining about the bread. And then war happened, and people came and they dove to try to take any bit of bread. And what's the difference? When there's a war, we don't look at the precise, we're not so picky. When there's a spiritual war and you're being attacked spiritually, the Almighty is very happy with any mitzvah that you do. You may think, it used to be when things are calm and in peacetime, you could say, well, this person, maybe they're not so righteous, it's not so perfect, there's this flaw and that flaw. No, it's wartime now. Whatever we do is cherished and beloved by God. There's a very famous essay that he wrote where he looked at all the inventions, the phonograph and the telephone and the radio and the camera. And he said, these are all, the Almighty gives humanity the ability to invent these technologies because he wants us to have a visualization of spiritual realities. We think we say things and there's no way to record it. Doesn't matter. It's not imprinted anywhere. It's just words that just fly out and disappear. No, there's the phonograph, the telephone. You can record it and play it later. That's to teach us that our words are recorded and they're played later. And our actions are there's a camera watching us and measuring our every action. The radio was invented. Why? So of course we could add that the internet and television, all that. The telegram. He would talk about the telegram. Telegram, you pay for every letter. So you have to think, what am I going to say? I'm going to say the shortest amount of words, so it's cheaper. That's how you have to be with your speech. Make sure you don't say one extra word, and you don't say one word needlessly. Again, lots of famous stories. I'll tell you another famous one here. He told over to his students, he said that I woke up and the Yetzer Hara says, you're so old. How could you possibly get up? It's so cold outside. You're going to go to shul to daven, to pray. Go back to sleep. So he told his Yetzer Hara, says, you are even older than me and you got up even before me. So I could certainly get up now. It's the famous analogy of the woman or the girl selling apples. And some ruffian comes and knocks out the apples and they start falling down. She starts crying. And all the people are grabbing apples, stealing apples from her. And someone comes to her and says, why don't you also grab some apples? Don't just sit around and cry. People are praying. They pray and their mind is wandering and they're not concentrating and there's no devotion. And they're just losing it all. Okay, but now you're halfway through prayer. Grab some apples. You can still do something more. It's not perfect, so what? But grab what you can. These are some of the very famous teachings that he taught. But again, if I'm misleading you to think that this is it, there's thousands, tens of thousands. We have books that are anthologies. I have books, anthologies of his writing, thick books, and very, very powerful and fundamental books. And what's also interesting about it, this is true with his speeches and his writings and his whole persona. It's scaled very nicely. You could have a simple person, a lay person, who could read it and understand it. But the simplicity is actually masking tremendous depth and greatness. When he would speak at a rabbinic conference, there's a very famous conference in 1923 that he traveled to Vienna to the rabbinic conference, and all the great Torah giants of the world were there, and everyone was craning their ear and their neck to hear what he had to say. And the great people, they understood the profundity of what he was trying to say. But even the simpletons, he spoke to them as well. In his writings, he would hire lay people to be editors. And he would ask regular people, does this make sense to you? You didn't want it to be scholarly and monographs that are limited to the more scholastically inclined. He would spend a lot of effort to make sure, certainly in his halachic writings, that it's clear, it's concise, it's sharp, it's to the point. There's a story that he was once editing a piece of his work, and they spent hours, him and his son-in-law, who was a close collaborator. They were dealing with a very difficult subject, and he had to write down the halacha, but in a way that was simple and clear and concise. And after hours and hours, they wrote one line and a half line. That's it. And every word was perfect. Was perfectly filtered, the right word, measured. And his son-in-law told him, he said, do you think anyone will ever appreciate just how much work and effort we put into this line? So he told him a story. It was a classic Chofetz Chaim sort of story. It says there was once a young man and his son. They were traveling. They were sent by the Tsar to go to Siberia to go work on the infrastructure of Siberia, to make roads and dig ditches in Siberia. And they're working and they're working and they're working. And there's no one around. Hundreds of miles. It's barren land. And the son tells the father, we're working so hard to make these streets and to make it paved and to make it nice. Will anyone ever appreciate it? And the father says, we have the Tsar, the holy Tsar, the great Tsar. That's what we do it for. Same thing. We're doing this for Hashem. We're doing this for the Almighty. That's what we're doing for. And how privileged are we to do it for that cause? And whether or not people enjoy it and realize what went into it, that's not our calculation. But it is indeed true that his books are accepted universally and revered and studied universally. So the first book is the Sefer Chofetz Chaim, the book of Chofetz Chaim. And he wrote a companion work called Shmiras HaLashon, guarding of the tongue, and it spawned a revolution. And he argues and he proves that Lashon Hara is basically the worst sin of them all. And there's a lot of sensitivity that we have even today, and I don't think it's much of a leap to say that this is attributable to the Chofetz Chaim. He resurrected this mitzvah. Lots of campaigns and initiatives across the world, even today. There's a sensitivity against speaking gossip. In Israel, there's these bumper stickers. And people wear bracelets. Lashon Hara lo medaber elai, which means evil talk, Lashon Hara, doesn't speak to me. That's a campaign. It comes from the Chofetz Chaim. Because this mitzvah, it wasn't taken seriously. It was ignored. It was neglected. And even in the Talmudic times, the Talmud says, basically everyone is guilty of this. And if you're not guilty of Lashon Hara, there's the dust, which means the fine, subtle types of Lashon Hara. That certainly everyone is guilty of. And there was no work to collect all the laws. There was no single work, a halachic work that assembles it all in one place. The laws are scattered all over the Talmud, the Midrash. And the Talmud says very harsh things about speaking Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara lengthens the adzal. Habitual speakers of Lashon Hara, they lose the portion of the world to come. And there's four groups that don't receive the face of the Shekhinah, whatever that means. And one of them is the habitual Lashon Hara speakers. Lashon Hara kills the speaker, it kills the listener, and it kills the person that's speaking about. And it's worse on some level than the three cardinal sins. And the Chofetz Chaim assembles all the sources and speaks about the importance of it and urges the fulfillment of this mitzvah. And he tells us there's 17 different prohibitions and 14 for a total of 31 positive mitzvahs that a person violates when they speak one word of Lashon Hara. And if someone speaks Lashon Hara, their prayer won't work because their mouth is corrupted. And the mouth is so important. The mouth is the defining characteristic of humanity. And you corrupt that, your Torah won't click, your prayer won't click. He really persuades you in a systematic and authoritative way to learn the laws and to make sure you don't speak any words that are slanderous or that are evil. But of course, there has to be laws for when it's appropriate to speak evil talk. What are the parameters of acceptable Lashon Hara? It has to be beneficial. Should I invest with this guy and you know this person is a swindler? Well, you can't let the person suffer and invest with the embezzler. Yes, but there are 7 prerequisites in order for permissible beneficial negative talk. What about the dust of Lashon Hara? Suppose you know that there's someone who doesn't like another person. Just as you're prohibited to say something negative or damaging or harmful about another person, you can't praise a person in the presence of someone that you know doesn't like them in front of their enemy, because that will goad them into speaking negatively, and thus you're responsible for them speaking negatively. I would very much recommend a wonderful book in English. These books have been translated into English. Fantastic. There's also a book that takes the laws, but also the lessons. Those 2 companion works, the Chofetz Chaim and the Spiritual Lashon, and they have what's known as a lesson a day, where each day you could study a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It will change your life. Now, this book was published anonymously in 1873, so he's 34 at the time. And the greatest leader of the nation at the time was Rabbi Israel Salanter. And even though he showed him the book, Rabbi Salanter didn't want to give him an approbation, because they actually had a disagreement about one of the laws in the book. Asking forgiveness for someone who you spoke negatively about. On one hand, you do something bad to another person, you have to ask forgiveness. On the other hand, if they don't know that you spoke negatively about them, you didn't cause them any material damage, well, then you're just going to cause more problems by asking forgiveness. Maybe you shouldn't ask for forgiveness. That was the debate, and Rabbi Salanter did not give the approbation as a result of that. But the Chofetz Chaim lived by what he preached. He had otherworldly fastidiousness about not listening to Lashon Hara. There's one story where he sat next to a farmer on a train. This farmer's sitting next to another Jew, so they're chatting. So what does he chat about? He's like his crops and his animals and his husbandry, and the Chofetz Chaim is listening intently to every word. And they arrive at the destination, and there's throngs of people. They're expecting the Chofetz Chaim to come. And this farmer is like, "Oh, I've been driving this guy nuts. I've been driving the Chofetz Chaim nuts for the whole train ride." So he went to apologize for wasting his time. He says, "No, don't you understand? I haven't enjoyed a conversation like this in a long time," because it was 4 hours of conversation without even a hint of any Lashon Hara. In general, they used to say about the Chofetz Chaim that he was very conversational. He was always speaking. You could speak and not violate Lashon Hara. He wanted to demonstrate that with his behavior. When the book was published, it was revolutionary. And it got a lot of attention, including some attention from some smart Alex. And they said, "Oh, this guy, he's 34 years old. He's going to tell us about these laws. We're going to go around and we'll start speaking. Despite speaking Lashon Hara, see what happens. Let's see how he reacts." So they were sitting at a table together, and they start speaking to each other, and they look over and they see the Chofetz Chaim fell asleep. No, there's no Lashon Hara in his orbit. Some have suggested that if you look at his writings, there's something so special about how precise they are and how the language just flows. Some speculated he maintained fidelity, the fidelity of his tongue, of his words, of his language. He never sullied his powers of communication with any Lashon Hara. And the Meir says, okay, your words will flow as if they came from a golden tongue. And there's one humorous story that I read from a very reputable source. It tells that the Chofetz Chaim was in his 80s already, and someone came to visit him, and he was on his bed, and he wasn't feeling well. And in the middle of the conversation, the Chofetz Chaim says, "I want you to look inside my mouth." That's kind of terrifying. He says, "Look inside my mouth, count my teeth." And the rabbi opens his mouth and he starts counting the teeth, and he has pearly, healthy, robust teeth, not missing anything, which is unusual at the time without modern dentistry and all that. And he says, I guarded my mouth. The Almighty protected it as well. Chofetz Chaim became the name that he was known for, but you could argue that the Sefer, the book Mishnah Berurah, was even more impactful. It's hard for someone who doesn't necessarily understand the dynamics of how we have the codification of halacha. It's hard to appreciate the importance of this book. I would make an argument that this is the most important Jewish book, Torah book, in hundreds of years, authored by the Chofetz Chaim. It's a staple in every Jewish home. It's relied upon in every home, in every camp, in every community. Halacha, you think of the history of halacha as like a cycle of complexity and simplicity. You have halacha, you have the Talmud. The Talmud has all of the halacha, all of the practical law. But it's not organized. You have to know all of Talmud to know the answer. And you have to know every possible variable in every possible teaching in the Talmud. You have to be a real expert. It's complex. So then the Rambam can say, okay, I'm going to simplify it. I'm going to organize it. I'm going to just give you just the bottom line. But then a bunch of other sages do the same thing, and suddenly you have 5 or 10 books of the sort. So comes along Rabbi of Cairo, and he says, I'm going to write the Shulchan Aruch. I'm going to make it a set table. I'm going to organize it. For once and for all, I'll simplify it. And he writes the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law. It's simple. It's simple until all the commentaries start mounting. And it used to be that the Shulchan Aruch was supposed to be studied every month. Just review it every month. Short, to the point, short and sweet. But today, if you open up a modern book of Shulchan Aruch, there's like one line of actual text of the Shulchan Aruch and then mountains of commentaries. It's no longer simple. It's complex. Now, the Shulchan Aruch is broken up into 4 different major sections, and the most pertinent one is known as Orach Chaim, the way of life. All the laws that relate to daily Jewish living. The Chofetz Chaim wrote a monumental commentary that takes all of the different commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch and assembles them and organizes them into one final authoritative work on a commentary that assimilates all the different books and opinions and customs and backstories and explanations all into one. It's like the number one book today for studying this part of the Shulchan Aruch, the part that's most relevant to daily Jewish life. And he spent 25 years finishing these 6 volumes. And it's a staple. It was universally accepted. It's known as the last authority, the final word in Orach Chaim, which is the most important part of Jewish life. Laws of prayer, laws of blessings, laws of Shabbos, all the festivals and so on. Those sorts of daily and cyclical Jewish life, it's there. And the Chofetz Chaim wrote this book. And again, the book itself, it's the text of the Shulchan Aruch, and it's actually multiple different commentaries. You have what's known as the Mishnah Berurah, which means the clear delineation of the law. And then you have the more advanced, in-depth Bir Halacha, and so on, other different accompanying parts that he all wrote. And again, today, this is known as the last word, the most universally accepted word of halacha across many, many, and really all Jewish communities. Now, there's a lot of stories about the writing of the Mishnah Berurah, of this work of halacha, and it was a particularly difficult time in his life, and he was suffering from grinding poverty, and he would buy yesterday's bread on credit from the local baker, and all sorts of calamities happened. Part of the town burnt down, and there's a terrible episode where his son passed away, and actually he had a dream. As he's publishing the book, volume 3, he has a dream that a Torah scroll falls on the floor. And he knew right away what this meant. What the prophetic version of this dream is. His son had passed away. And as he was in the middle of writing the laws of what to do when someone, God forbid, dies on Shabbos. And the story goes, the legend goes, that he understood that the Satan's trying to stop him from writing this book that's going to be so necessary and so fundamental to Jewish life. And apparently he banged on the table and he screamed, "It's not going to help. I know what you're trying to do to me. The nation needs this work and I'm going to finish it." And again, we could do a whole session on just each one of these books, but he wrote many, many books. So another great one is called Ahavas Chesed, loving kindness, all the laws and stories and teachings about the greatness of chesed, of kindness. He wrote works about studying the more neglected parts of the Talmud, namely that of Kachim. There's a whole order of Mishnah, a whole section, major section of Talmud that deals with sacrifices. Well, we don't have a temple. We can't do sacrifices today. We believe Messiah could come any day. Temple could be rebuilt any day. What's going to be? The nation's ignorant about what to do when the temple's rebuilt. Messiah comes. So he wrote one book about encouraging the study of this section of Talmud. And they wrote a second book about, ostensibly it's about yearning, anticipating, awaiting Messiah. It's called Tzipisa Liyeshu, which means it's one of the Talmud says there's 6 questions that a person is asked after they die. The heavenly tribunal asks them 6 questions. And one of them is, did you wait for Messiah? Did you yearn for Messiah? So he writes a book about yearning for Messiah, but the punchline of the book is, well, do you really yearn for it? Are you preparing for it? Do you know the laws that are applicable in the times of Messiah? You're going to wait for Elijah to come teach you the laws? No, Elijah will not teach you the laws that you cannot learn on your own. You have to learn it. So the whole final part of the book is an exhortation to study the laws of Kachim. The legend has it that he himself was living with anticipation of Messiah, that he had a bag ready to go. And he had a suit ready to go, to put on, to don when Mashiach comes. And he himself was a Kohen, and he was even called in his lifetime the Kohen Gadol. He was known as the Great Kohen, because he was definitely going to be the Kohen Gadol. He was the greatest Kohen that we had at the time. And, well, there's a version of the story that I heard from someone here in Houston. Someone once, I think he gave a hitch to one of the descendants of the Chofetz Chaim. And he said to him, it's a well-known legend that your great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, whatever it was, had a special bag ready for Messiah and a special suit to don when Messiah comes. He says, it's not true. We know that if my great-grandfather had an extra suit, he would find a Jew who needs it and give it to them. Can't be that the story is true. Either way, he certainly was someone who very much made an emphasis about awaiting for Messiah and learning the laws that we need to do, that we need to be aware of when Messiah actually comes. He wrote a book to help the Jews traveling to America. At that time, America was a spiritual wasteland. There was no yeshivas, very, very little access to kosher foods. Jews are going to America. What's going to be with him? A synopsis of laws for everyday life. So they have a little bit of a manual for how to live as a Jew. He wrote a book, a guide for a Jewish soldier in the Russian army. What the Russians would do, they would take young Jewish boys, really everyone, they would conscript them at the age of 8 from Jewish families that have a quota from every town, and then they would be conscripted for 25 years. You have a Jewish child living amongst these Russian drunks. What's going to be of them? So he wrote a book written for Russian army soldiers who are Jewish. And it's interesting that if you read the book, he's very mindful of the censor. So he's paying tribute to the great Tsar, who's so wonderful and so beloved. But what are the halachic issues that a Jewish soldier will encounter? How to retain your Jewish observance in a very hostile environment. There's a famous story where he once encountered a man, Jewish man, but this man starts eating in a very aggressive way, and he's not making a blessing, and he's drinking whiskey like a peasant. So the Chofetz Chaim sees him and gently tries to rebuke him to behave more properly. And the innkeeper that was there, he says, no. This guy, when he was 8, he was taken by the Tsar's army, and he was there for years, and 25 years conscripted in the army, and spent 10 years in Siberia, and he became like a Russian peasant. Just let him be. So the Chofetz Chaim went over to this person. He said, it's unbelievable. I heard that you were raised from a very young age to live amongst the peasant Gentiles, and you didn't convert and become a Christian? I wish I had merits like you. I wish I was as righteous and as noble in the eyes of God as you are. In the next world, you will be viewed as a total tzaddik, a total righteous person. You forfeited so much for your faith. That's what he told the soldier. And the man started to cry and embrace the Chofetz Chaim. This is a typical example of a story. Someone who has such a wholesome heart, who was so gentle and so loving and so kind. Indeed, he was called a high priest, a Kohen Gadol. He lived like Aaron did, someone who loved people, sought peace, pursued peace, loved people, and brought them close to Torah, never demonizing anyone, always trying to see them in a positive light and to do whatever he can to bring them closer. There's an interesting related story. When the First World War ended, there was a lot of Jews that were involved, Jewish communities that were right in the middle of the battlefields, and it upended Jewish life as it did life in general in Europe for 4 years. Chofetz Chaim was already a very old man at the time. And he traveled to Vilna to speak with the aforementioned Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grudzinski. And he said to him, we have to do something for the Jewish soldiers. We have to make some kosher food. They go to the army. There's no kosher food. So we have Jews who are forced to eat non-kosher. And some of them are stationed around the city. So you have to provide for them kosher food. At the time, it's like a very chaotic time. Like the city had very recently been occupied by an army. And there was so much trouble and so much suffering happening, and people didn't know what would tomorrow bring. And people didn't even know they had any food for bread for the next day. To think about the Russian soldiers, the Jewish Russian soldiers who don't have kosher food, it's not something that was really front of mind. But the Chofetz Chaim shows up. So Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grudzinski, who was considered to be the Gadol Adar, the greatest leader of the generation, and he was in Vilna, as is well known. He says, listen, now is not the right time to deal with that. They've been eating with the general Russian army for a long time, for years. If it happens for a few more months, it's not the end of the world. So the Chofetz Chaim responded to him. He says, listen, people decided that I'm a righteous person. And they listened to me because I'm an old person. I'm not going to be here for forever. And I know when I come there, they're going to ask me, why did you not save Jews from eating non-kosher? Now I'm happy. I'm calm. Because I'm going to tell them I went there, even though I was very old, and he had a lung infection at the time. I traveled to Vilna, and I tried. And I met the rabbi of the town, and he said, it's not the time to do it. Now I'm happy. I could go back home. I don't have to worry about it. I do what I can. So of course the great rabbi here says, oh, we have to do something. And indeed, they made a big announcement. The Chofetz Chaim is coming to speak, and he's speaking in the great synagogue in Vilna. And the Chofetz Chaim spoke about it, and they raised money, and they made a kosher kitchen for the locally stationed, garrisoned Jewish troops. My grandfather, blessed memory, when he was 19, the Chofetz Chaim passed away. And at the time, he was a student in the yeshiva in Switzerland. And his fellow yeshiva students, they said to him, why don't you give a eulogy for the Chofetz Chaim? So he gave a eulogy. And the main thrust of the eulogy is how the Chofetz Chaim was not a person who had an official post. And he had just a humble home in Radin, some small little town, backwater town. But without an official post and without any official prestige, his influence reverberated the world over. His words spread throughout the whole world. And my grandfather the next year, or some months later, he joined the yeshiva in Poland, in the Meir, under the great Rabbi Levavitz, who was a student of the Chofetz Chaim. And he discovered that the eulogy that he gave, it matched the eulogy that his new teacher gave on the Chofetz Chaim. But this is the story of the Chofetz Chaim. He didn't wear rabbinic garb. He wore like a casquette, which is like a layman's hat. Wasn't officially ordained as a rabbi. Resisted any publicity. He refused to be interviewed or photographed. I mentioned earlier there was the great rabbinic conference in Vienna in 1923. That's the memorable Knessia Gedola, where they introduced the Daf Yomi. He needed a passport to get there, but he didn't want his picture taken. So the Polish government, they granted him a special exemption. He could have a passport without a photograph. But when he got to part of the form occupation, he wasn't able to write rabbi because he wasn't officially ordained as a rabbi. So he was in his 80s, and the Reb Chaim Ozer Gradinsky, the Gadol Adar, he gave him smicha, official rabbinic ordination. He was the rabbi of the whole nation, but wasn't officially a rabbi. There's even a story, an American reporter came to interview him in Radin, and he didn't want to be interviewed by some American reporter. But this woman was allowed to glimpse through a window to see this great sage. And his visage was so powerful that she wrote this very laudatory article, even though she never spoke to him. He didn't want any publicity, and he was pained by his existing renown. And like I said, there's no photographs of him. The butcher is the photograph, the famous photograph of the Chofetz Chaim. It's actually of the local butcher in Radin who apparently looked similar to him. But it was recently discovered about 8 or 10 years ago. There was a video they found. Someone stationed a video, like a tripod with a video of all the people coming into this Knessia Gadol, this rabbinic conference in 1923. And there's like a 10-second clip of the Chofetz Chaim. And I encourage everyone to watch it because you see very clearly the piety and the modesty and the humility and the simplicity, but the undeniable greatness. With him, he tried to hide everything, but ultimately it burst forth. My grandfather used to say, if someone merited to hear the Chofetz Chaim speak, everyone sensed that it's like prophecy. It's like the divine presence is speaking from his throat. He testified about himself. I never lied once in my life. I told y'all earlier. He said, I never inconvenienced another person even once in my life. There was once a time he was very old already, and Radin was not known for its infrastructure. And it was like after a rainy season, so it was like the place was full of mud. You couldn't walk on the streets, and the streets weren't paved. And it was full of mud, so what they did is they took like a plank of wood, and people would walk on that one little plank of wood to not sink into the mud. So the Chofetz Chaim was walking on this plank of wood, and then there's an officer in the Polish army who's walking in the opposite direction. So right away the Chofetz Chaim jumps off to the side to let the guy pass. And the young officer sees this old rabbi, it must be in his 90s, barely 5 feet, not even 5 feet. And he says, you're an older person. I'll move to the side so you could go through. The Chofetz Chaim told him, I never in my life pushed away or inconvenienced any person. I'm not going to start now. Someone with a heart, angelic. If someone else suffered, he suffered. Any pain that someone else experienced, hurt him as well. During World War I, his life was chaotic. The yeshiva was split into two. He refused to sleep on a bed for the duration of the war. When my brothers and sisters are suffering, I'm not going to live a life of luxury. Everyone else's problems were his problems. At the end of his life, he decided to go to Israel. He sensed that redemption was imminent. They tried to stop him. They said, we can't leave. A father cannot abandon his children. They made a whole conference. We have to keep the Chofetz Chaim here. And everyone pleaded with him. And his wife took ill and he became ill and all sorts of blockages stopped his arrival to Israel. Some have speculated that who knows what would have happened if the Chofetz Chaim actually made it there and how maybe history would have been different. At the very end of Prophets, in the book of Malachi, Scripture offers a stunning depiction of a Kohen, of a priest with whom God made a covenant. And you read a description that's so superlative. It's describing a man of such otherworldly greatness. The only proper comparison is to that of an angel. This is from the Haftorah of Parshas Toldos. It says, the ruling of true Torah were in his mouth, and corruption was not found in his lips. He served God with complete fidelity and brought many back from sin. For the lips of the Kohen guard knowledge, and Torah they will seek from his mouth, for he is like an angel of God. Who is this amazing, angelic, noble, pious Kohen? So wonderful, so righteous, so elevated. The ancient sources in the Midrash point to the first Kohen, Moshe's older brother, the first high priest of our people, Aaron, and his son and his grandsons, as fitting this lofty description. I'm certain, that had the codifiers of the Midrash, had they seen the Chofetz Chaim, lived in modern times, passed away in 1933, had they met Rabbi Yisrael Meir Hakohen, the Kohen, Kagan, they would have agreed that this verse is an apt description of him as well. My grandfather, of blessed memory, used to say that if the nations, if they had a personality, a persona, as great as Maimonides, as great as the Rambam, they would immediately deify him. I think that if the nations were privy to such a person as the Chofetz Chaim, he would also be deified. Because such greatness, we're familiar with it. Our nation. It doesn't exist elsewhere. And what can we say? How fortunate are we to have the Almighty's Holy Torah and to see how it can transform people into veritable angels. And hopefully we can take a thing or two from the story of the Chofetz Chaim and elevate ourselves. I would encourage you to do what you can to get hold of some of his books, because they exude holiness and righteousness and elevation and love. He was a great genius, but his genius is masked by his piety. These books are transformative. They spawned movements. They helped the nation when they needed help. The Chofetz Chaim's influence towers over our generation, even though it's, almost 100 years since he passed. How fortunate are we to have had someone like that in our midst? May we all be so fortunate to elevate ourselves, to learn from his story and from his lessons, and hopefully to learn from his books and to be elevated together with this great sage. I thank you for listening. This was a delight, as it always is. My email address is rabbiwalby@gmail.com. If you would like to support the annual Torch fundraiser, it's happening right now at givetorch.org. I look forward to your questions, your comments, and your feedback.